The money arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, and that was the moment everything began to fall apart. For months, Daniel had been waiting for that notification. His phone vibrated on the glass table beside him as the Lagos traffic roared faintly outside his apartment window. When he picked up the phone and saw the alert from his bank, his heart started pounding. $50,000. It had finally come through. Daniel leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath, the kind that only comes when a risky plan finally works. He had spent 6 months building the perfect story, 6 months pretending to be someone else, 6 months slowly gaining the trust of a woman who believed she had finally found love again after years of loneliness. Now the money was his, or at least that's what he believed. Daniel was 27 years old and already living a life most people his age could only dream about. He drove a sleek black car, wore designer clothes, and spent nights in the most expensive lounges in Lagos. People in his neighborhood knew him as Danny Boy, the quiet guy who somehow always had money. But behind that flashy lifestyle was a secret career Daniel had perfected since his early 20s. He was a Yahoo boy, an internet scammer. At first, it had started as something small, a few fake emails, some online tricks he learned from older guys in cyber cafes. Back then, he barely made enough to buy food, but over time, Daniel became smarter, more patient, more strategic. He learned how to study people. He learned how to make strangers trust him, and most importantly, he learned how to make them believe they were in love. That was Daniel's specialty, romance scams. Unlike the loud, careless scammers who rushed victims for quick money, Daniel took his time. He built relationships slowly. Weeks would pass before he even mentioned money. By the time his victims sent anything, they already believed he was the man they would spend their future with. That was how he met Margaret. At least, that's what the name she gave him. According to her profile, Margaret was a 62-year-old widow living in Texas. Her husband had died 5 years earlier, and her children had moved far away. Her messages were polite, warm, and sometimes painfully lonely. The first time Daniel read one of her messages, he almost skipped past it. Older victims sometimes required more patience than he liked. But something about her tone made him reply. And that single reply started a conversation that would change everything. Daniel introduced himself as Michael Carter, a successful engineer working on international construction projects. The identity was completely fake, of course. The photos he used belonged to a random businessman he had found online. The story about working on projects overseas was just believable enough to explain why they could never meet in person. Margaret believed every word. Within weeks, their conversations became daily. They talked about food, music, childhood memories, and sometimes about grief. Margaret often mentioned how quiet her house felt after her husband passed away. Daniel would respond with comforting words he had written hundreds of times before. But something strange started happening as the weeks went by. Margaret wasn't just another victim sending short replies. She wrote long messages, detailed ones. Sometimes she asked Daniel thoughtful questions about his life. Sometimes she talked about her fears, her memories, even her regrets. Daniel found himself spending more time chatting with her than he planned, but in his mind there was always a goal: the money. After 3 months, Daniel slowly introduced the story he had prepared. He told Margaret that the construction project he was managing had run into a serious financial problem. The company handling payments overseas had frozen his account temporarily. He said he needed help covering a temporary expense until the issue was resolved. He promised he would repay her immediately. Margaret didn't respond right away. For the first time since they started talking, an entire day passed without a message. Daniel felt a small knot of worry in his stomach. Had he pushed too soon? Had she finally realized the truth? Then the next morning, her reply appeared. She said she trusted him and she would help. The first transfer was small, just $5,000. Daniel smiled when he saw the alert. Everything was working perfectly. Over the next 2 months, the amount slowly increased, $10,000, $15,000, then $20,000. Each time, Daniel created a new emergency that required more help. Margaret always agreed. Sometimes she hesitated, but she always agreed. By the time the final transfer of $50,000 arrived, Daniel had collected nearly $100,000 from her. It was the biggest scam of his career. That night, Daniel and his friends celebrated at a rooftop bar overlooking the city. Music blasted from giant speakers while expensive drinks flowed freely. Daniel's friends laughed and congratulated him. One of them asked how he managed to convince an old woman to send so much money. Daniel simply shrugged and raised his glass. He said, "Patience." But while Daniel was celebrating, thousands of kilometers away, something else was happening. In a quiet office building filled with glowing computer screens, a group of investigators watched Daniel's messages in real time. Margaret wasn't a lonely widow. Her real name was Agent Rebecca Lawson, and she worked for an international cybercrime task force. For nearly a year, her team had been tracking a network of romance scammers operating out of West Africa. These scammers had stolen millions from victims around the world. Many victims were elderly people who lost their entire life savings. Some never recovered emotionally. Some even fell into depression after discovering the truth. Rebecca had volunteered for the undercover role. For months, she created the persona of Margaret, carefully crafting messages designed to attract scammers. Many contacted her. Most were easy to identify, but Daniel was different. He was patient, careful, professional, and that made him extremely valuable to their investigation. Rebecca's team had been quietly gathering evidence for months. They tracked every message, every transfer, every account Daniel used, and they were getting closer. But Rebecca wanted something bigger. She didn't just want Daniel, she wanted the entire network behind him. Meanwhile, Daniel had no idea any of this was happening. He believed he had just completed the most successful scam of his life. The next morning, he woke up late, slightly dizzy from the night of celebration. Sunlight spilled across the room as he checked his phone. There was a new message from Margaret. She thanked him for being honest with her about his financial struggles. She said she hoped the money helped solve his problems. And then she asked one simple question. "Michael, when do you think we will finally meet in person?" Daniel smiled. He had answered this question many times before with other victims. He typed back quickly. "Soon. Once my project finishes, I'll fly to Texas, I promise." Margaret replied almost immediately. "That would make me very happy." Then another message appeared. "But before that, there's something I need to tell you." Daniel paused. For a moment, he felt a strange uneasiness. Then the next message arrived. "Michael Carter doesn't exist." Daniel frowned. His fingers hovered over the screen. Another message appeared. "And neither does Margaret." His heart skipped. He stared at the phone as the final message appeared. "Daniel, we know where you live." Outside his apartment building, two black vehicles rolled slowly to a stop. Daniel's phone slipped from his hand. For the first time in years, the scammer realized he might have just scammed the wrong person, and in that moment, his entire world began collapsing, because the game he thought he was playing had actually been a trap from the very beginning.